All right. Next up, Jamie would not be surprised if Keon Coleman is the best rookie wide receiver. Go ahead.
I mean, he has to, leap over some pretty big time talents. The best one being Marvin Harrison Jr.
Wow, that would be, man. I thought like if you had just gone, I wouldn't be surprised if you were the second best wide receiver. I think that would have been kind of bold enough. But this is a big
Well,
ask.
I mean, you look at opportunity and who he's playing with, and that's what you're hoping is that he comes into Buffalo and becomes what Stephon Diggs was. I mean, that's a huge ask, but clearly, you're looking at an opportunity to be an alpha with an alpha quarterback, and he's got it. And so, I thought maybe Brian Thomas would be good for this, but he's got to get past Kirk and Ingram, and obviously Coleman's got to get past Kincaid, but he's not proven. And so, if Coleman comes in and can be that type of guy, where it's mostly going to be touchdowns. I think he'll be a 900 plus yard receiver. I think he'll have the chance for, 65, 75 catches. But if he can be an 8 touchdown guy, a 10 touchdown guy, and look, I know Marvin Harrison has the perfect opportunity as well. Obviously Malik Neighbors has a great opportunity, but there's quarterback concerns. And let's face it, Kyler Murray hasn't exactly had the best track record of supporting a number one receiver consistently. He's done it at times, but he hasn't done it consistently. So if Coleman can be legit with his quarterback and that opportunity there, wouldn't shock me.
Yeah. Dan, I'm curious. I don't know if I've ever heard your thoughts on Keon Coleman, another polarizing prospect. You're talking about HN as a polarizing fantasy option, but Coleman just makes it into round 1 and slowest 40, fastest gauntlet among the receivers. I thought absolutely terrible with contested catches. I don't know how you felt about that. What'd you think of Coleman?
Yeah, just outside round 1, but they took him top of round 2.
Sorry. That's right.
Same, it's still fine though. It's a lot. It's major capital. You nailed it. I think when it comes to Keon Coleman, he's not the fastest 40 time guy, but he was the fastest in the gauntlet drill, and you could see that on film. I think the area of the field that he's going to win in is over the intermediate middle of the field on those in-breaking routes and the 10 to 15 yard range, and that's kind of the area of the field where Josh Allen thrives at the most, and it's why we've seen him have some successful players at the past, like Gabe Davis when he was healthy for short periods of time, and obviously Stephon Diggs. So I think the fit is great. My issue with Coleman is what makes him so polarizing is we've seen these types of prospects, N'Keal Harry, these types of guys who you just don't know. It's impossible to predict if they're going to be able to separate at the NFL level because the corners they face on a weekly basis, even if they were playing in like the SEC, most of them are going to be practice squad at best. And so you're facing the best of the best 64 outside corners. And sometimes, you get press man and there's just no separation there. And that's not something that Josh Allen had to deal with Diggs, but at times with Gabe Davis, that was an issue, creating separation on the outside. So I'm not willing to go all in or anything on him, but for a show like this where I wouldn't be surprised I wouldn't be surprised at all if he just beats it. He's able to beat man press coverage on the outside. And then in that scenario, all the other things he does well on the football field shine. And I will say this about Coleman. I don't want to label him as like another one of these like JJ Athea, what is his name? Athega Whiteside type guys. Because like none of those types of guys that came before Coleman were returning punts for their college team. He was returning punts for Florida State. And when you watch some of those punt returns, if you're breaking down his tape, you see that he's pretty elusive in the open field. And that's not something I think you could say about some of those guys who busted in the past with this type of wide receiver archetype, I should say.
Follow up. So you said, you don't know if he'll be able to separate. Is there something specifically about him? Did he not separate that well in college? Because you don't have those concerns about like Harrison or Neighbors, right?
You don't have those concerns about Harrison because Harrison is such a diverse release package off the line of scrimmage. It was just looked like a veteran. That's not something I saw with Coleman. So that's an issue, just having that different release package. When it comes to Neighbors, he actually only had one release package off the line of scrimmage, the speed release and with the jab step, but that's fine because he's so elusive and quick that he can create separation that way. Coleman may not have that trump card. So yeah, it was an issue for him at Florida State already.
Gotcha. And look, I mean, in the ESPN draft, Coleman went 51st.
Yeah.
In our PPR draft, he went 94th.
Wow.
And you know what, Jamie? I decided, I was like, I don't know if I'm going to do any of these. I wouldn't be surprised if I decided not to do any. But the one that I was thinking of was I wouldn't be surprised if Keon Coleman has a huge year or Josh Allen is a bust.
Oh.
I just wonder, can Josh Allen, I know he was good last year at the end because he had so many rushing touchdowns, the second half of the year when Stephon Diggs basically disappeared. But I'm wondering if Josh Allen can be a top 3 quarterback without one of these receivers stepping up and having 1,000-yard season or something like that. I don't know how
it's a huge concern. I mean, and again, it's hard to, we really don't have a good basis of comparison because, to judge Josh Allen's first couple of years before Stephon Diggs, he was clearly coming into his own, learning how to be an NFL quarterback, relying on his athleticism. But he wasn't this elite level fantasy quarterback. He was just good. And then he became elite when he got Stephon Diggs. And so what you saw last year was the passing numbers were a little scary at the end of the season, but the rushing production was exceptional. I mean, 15 rushing touchdowns was fantastic. But if he's going to do that again, go from the 7-8 touchdown range, which is kind of where he lived, to 15 again, he'll be fine because I think this receiving core will support him enough. But if that goes away and it's 7 rushing touchdowns and 25 passing touchdowns, that's a problem. And I think we have still a top 12 quarterback by far because he'll run for enough yards and those rushing scores will be fine. But to draft him as a top 4 guy, which I think is pretty safe. I don't think he's going to escape the top 4 in anybody's rankings. You need him to be that level of performer. We don't want to have a situation like last year where everybody drafted Mahomes and Justin Herbert and whether injury or just poor performance, they flopped. You don't want to have that again.
But on the same time, like the one quick point on that I think is interesting. With the same time, with those two that flopped last year, you mentioned Mahomes and Herbert. None of them really had that rushing floor, but a player like Jalen Hurts, who had a really down season for him, was still able to be a fantasy contributor and not a bust from that sense, like those guys who are Herbert and Mahomes because of that rushing floor. So I don't think that just goes away for Josh Allen. Maybe it's not 15, but
he was. Yeah, good.
And I think part of it also is, to go back to his early years, Dalton Kincaid's a first-round talent. Keon Coleman is basically a first-round talent. Khalil Shakir has been a very reliable option, when he's played, and we saw it at the end of last season. So Curtis Samuel's coming back to a system that he's had success with. James Cook's a very good pass catcher. So from a weapon standpoint, he has a very solid group. It just doesn't feel right now that he has an alpha. And there's opportunities, I think, for Kincaid, for Coleman, for somebody to step up and be an alpha. Those 2 guys would be my choices if I had to pick.
But also, I said Jalen Hurts went from 27.9 points per game in 2022 to 23.7 last year. Yes, he did end up having a very good season. That's because none of the quarterbacks had standout seasons, but he lost 4.
Oh no, I know he took a step back. It just wasn't a bust like that, like you got from Herbert.
Yes,
it would. No, correct. Yeah.